before.
Yeah, today's daf is Kaf Hey and Yoma. We're going to start on Kaf Daled Amud Bet, 5 lines from the bottom, where it says Bameh Mefisin. How do they do the pais? How do they conduct the lottery? Meaning to say, are the Kohanim dressed in their big day kehuna, or are they dressed in street clothes? Because nobody knows whether they're going to actually be chosen to do any avodah that day until they show up. So do they wear their big day kehuna, or do they wear regular clothing until they're chosen? So you have a machloket. Rav Nachman amar bevigdei chol, Rav Sheshet amar bevigdei kodesh. So Rav Nachman says that they wear big day chol, they wear their street clothes. Rav Sheshet says no, they wear big day kodesh. Rav Nachman amar bevig day chol, di amrat bevig day kodesh ikabal ezroot, the chamsei vavdei. So Rav Nachman says, I'll tell you why I think they should wear big day chol. Why should they wear weekday clothing, not big day kehuna? Because if they all wear big day kehuna, then you run the risk that it might be that somebody who wasn't really chosen in the lottery will go ahead and run ahead and do the service anyway, because he's already in big day kehuna. He's already ready to go, so maybe he's going to jump in and do it. This way, everyone's in street clothes, and only the people who are chosen in the lottery change it to big day kehuna, so you know who's legit. Okay, Rav Sheshet amar bevigdei kodesh. Rav Sheshet says no, they should wear big day kodesh. Why the amrat bevigdei chol? Because if you're going to tell me that it should be big day chol, agav chavivutei mikru v'avdi, you have a different problem. Because what might happen is that they're so excited that they were chosen to do the avodah that without changing into their big day kehuna, they're going to start doing it, and that is a really big averah. Right? You're not allowed to do the avodah without wearing the big day kehuna. It's the same as a non-kohen doing the avodah. Very serious violation. So because we're concerned about that, we make sure that they do have their big day kehuna on when they make the lottery. Now, Amar Rav Nachman says, Mina aminallah, where do I get my position from? What's my source? I gave you my reasoning. My reasoning is that I don't want someone masquerading as if they're supposed to be doing the avodah when really they weren't chosen. But what's the source that I have to support my contention that they should wear street clothes when they do the lottery? It's not because it says in the Mishnah, Misarun Chazanim, that they would pass. In other words, they would hand over the Kohanim who are going to be serving. Or that, so it would seem. They would pass the Kohanim over to the Chazanim, to the people who were involved, like the Gabayim, the people who are involved in managing administrative matters. They would take off their clothing. And the only thing that they would leave on them would be the pants. Okay? So they remove their clothing. So when we turn to page Kaf Hey Amud Aleph, my lav ba'otan shezachu l'pais. So what is how does Rav Nachman understand this Mishnah? That it says that they would remove the clothing and they would only leave the mechnasayim. He says he understands that as meaning the people, it's talking about the people who won the lottery. In other words, those people who did in fact win and were going to and served, okay, when they went to change, it says that they would take off everything except the mechnasayim. Okay? But Amar Rav Huna bar Yehuda, Amar Rav Sheshet. But Rav Huna bar Yehuda said that Rav Sheshet said, meaning Rav Sheshet objected to this proof. Lo botan shelo zachu l'pais. It can't be that it's talking about the people who won the lottery. That the people who won the lottery would be taking off their clothes and leaving on just their mechnasayim. Why would that be? It's the other way around. It's the people who lost the lottery. Achinami mistavran. How do we know that that's true? The isal kedatach botan shezachu l'pais lo yimenechina lehena lemechnasayim bilvad. Because you're going to tell me that it's talking about the people who won the lottery and they left on them only the mechnasayim. They left on them only the pants of the outfit, right? But we learned in a braita, minayin shelo yedavar kodem lemechnasayim, Talmud lamar umechnasei badi wal bisaro. That there's a halacha that the first thing that should be on the kohanim is the mechnasayim, is the pants. Okay? So, and as Rashi explains, Vafshatazo bigdei chol ulal bishan bigdei kodesh. So, because according to Rav Nachman, the way that it works is like this: that the people would come wearing their street clothes, right? And then the people who won the lottery, he's saying that the people who won the lottery would go and they would get undressed out of their street clothes, and they'd be putting on their big day kehuna. In other words, that's the machloket in understanding this Mishnah. Rav Nachman is understanding it like this: that when it describes taking off the clothes and leaving the pants, what it means to say is that they would go and they would take off the clothes of the street clothes that they did the lottery. They would leave pants on. They would put all the other big day kehuna, and then in a modest way, they would take the pants off and put the pants of the big day kehuna. But Rav Sheshet says that can't be the case. Why? Because the first thing you have to put on is the mechnasayim. The first garment that you have to put on is the mechnasayim, is the pants. So if, according to you, Rav Nachman, the way that they did it was they took off all of their clothes, leaving the mechnasayim. And then, meaning their weekday mechnasayim, their weekday pants. And then they put on all of the big day kahuna, and then they put on the big day kahuna pants. That can't be. That cannot be right.
The question is why, is there a requirement to, if they had the big day kahuna, is there a requirement to remove them at that point?
If they're done doing the service, they have to take them off. Yeah, they don't walk around in them all day. They only wear them for the service.
So why then would they put them on? Why would they put on big day kahuna at that point?
For the lottery. You mean for the lottery?
No,
because they might be chosen.
We're talking about after the.
No, because Rav Nachman is saying that we're talking about the people who actually won the lottery. So in other words, according to Rav Nachman, it worked like this. They came into the room wearing regular street clothes. They did the lottery. Let's say you were chosen. Now you go over to the assistant guy. He's going to take off all of your weekday clothes except your pants. Put on all the big day kahuna. And then you put on your pants. Then you have to switch the pants to the big day kahuna pants.
Right. But if you're...
But Rav Sheshet says that's not right, because actually when you put on big day kahuna, the first thing you have to put on is the pants, not the last thing.
No, but if you're wearing street clothes, there's no need at all to change clothes at all.
No, because these are the people who won. They have to go do the avodah now. How are they going to do it without their big day kahuna?
Okay, so then that's the point at which they're going to do that. So that means that on the other side, if they're not... if
chosen, they just walk out in their street clothes.
But if they're already wearing big day kahuna...
But they're not, according to Rav Nachman.
No, but if they were...
Right.
Then there wouldn't be... one case or the other, there would be no need for change of clothes.
That's true, right.
At all.
Of course.
So...
That is correct.
So how can they compare?
Well, that's it. So according to Rav Nachman, it's very simple. Why are we talking about change of clothes? Because when they did the lottery, you were wearing your weekday clothes.
Yeah.
So then it makes sense. But Rav Sheshet says, but it doesn't really make sense, because if it's talking about dressing you for doing the avodah, the first thing they should be putting on you is mechnasayim, not the last thing. And here it's saying, according to you, that they took off, that they changed all, they took off your street clothes and left your street pants on,
right.
Put all the rest of the big day kahuna on, and then put on the big day kahuna pants.
Right.
But that's not right, right? So he says, therefore, that can't be what it means. It must not be talking about that. It must be talking about the people who lost the lottery and are changing back into their weekday clothes from the big day kahuna. So it says they take off everything. That was the big day kahuna. They leave on the pants of the big day kahuna. They put on their regular clothing, and then they take off the pants of the big day kahuna last for the purposes of modesty. Right. That makes sense, says Rav Sheshet. Ve'idach, what will Rav Nachman say? Lo kashya, that's not really a problem. Your problem with how can they have the mechnasayim on, and change them last, that's not a problem. Why? Because hachikatani, this is what it means. Ad she'odan alehen big chol, malbishin otan mechnese kodesh, vayom afshitin otan big chol. What it means is there's a missing step here. In other words, since they were wearing their street clothes, Rav Nachman says, what they would do was, first they would change pants to mechnasayim of big day kahuna, and then they would take off the rest of the street clothes and they would change into big day kahuna. In other words, it's just missing a step. But really, of course, the first thing that they put on of the big day kahuna was the pants. It's just that they did the changing in a way that it was the most modest. So they didn't just strip you and then change.
That they would strip off everything except for the pants.
Right, so what he's saying is what it means is that first you would change pants to Big Day Kahuna, and then they would strip off all the rest of your street clothes. Except for the pants of Big Day Kahuna, not the pants of Chol. And then you would put on the rest of the Big Day Kahuna.
Yeah, but the way you read the text is if they take everything off, they just leave the pants that they already have on.
Well, that's how we were reading it up till now, but he's saying that can't be what it means. Now he's correcting that reading.
The other way.
Because he's saying that there's something missing. There's something missing from the Mishnah, an implied thing. That you came from the lottery, Rav Nachman says. You were wearing Big Day Chol. You take off everything. You first change into Big Day Kahuna pants. Then you take off everything that you were wearing.
The language has to be different.
Right, there has to be an additional clause.
No,
there has to be an additional clause. That first you change.
Yeah, but also the language, because if you say take off everything except for the pants, that means
there's just a missing sentence, which is first you change into Big Day Kahuna pants, then you take off everything except for the pants, because everything else you're wearing is street clothes. and then you put them.
Okay. So you do. Oh, okay. So that means you put them. Okay, you take everything off. You put the pants, and then
first you put on the Bigdei Kehuna pants while you're wearing your street clothes.
Right.
Let's say you're wearing jeans. I don't know. You take them off. You put on Bigdei Kehuna pants.
Right.
But you're wearing Bigdei Chol. Now you have to take off everything of the Bigdei Chol and put on the rest of the Bigdei Kehuna.
There must be.
They switched to Bigdei Kehuna pants first, while you were still wearing your regular street clothes.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm.
You walk in. You're wearing street clothes.
Yeah.
They used to wear a long tunic and pants, so they took off the pants.
Yeah.
Put on the Kehuna pants. Now they're wearing all street clothes except for Bigdei Kehuna pants.
That's what they do.
Then it says mafshitin oto chutz min ad mechnasayim. What does it mean? They took off all the Bigdei Chol except for the pants.
Okay, so they're
that's all.
Acts of.
That's it. Yeah. He says you have to add a step. You just have to add a step. That's all.
Right.
Okay? Rav Sheshet says, Mina aminala. Where do I get my idea? The opposite. That you don't do the payis, you don't do the lottery in street clothes. You do it in Bigdei Kehuna. The Tanya says it doesn't write the Lishkata Gazit come in basilki gedolaita. That the Lishkata Gazit, the chamber of hewn stone, was like a basilica. That's where the word comes from. Basilki, right? A big chamber. It was like a palatial type of chamber. And Haita Pais B'Mizracha, they would do in the east side of that chamber, they would do the lottery. V'zaken Yoshev B'Ma'arava, and in the west part of the chamber, there would be an elder sitting there. In other words, there would be a Talmid Chacham sitting there for the halachic issues, right? V'Kohanim Mukafin V'Omadin Kamin B'Chol Yar, and the Kohanim were in like a semicircle, right, or a circle for the. They were in a circular formation for the lottery. And he would take the mitznefet, he would take the turban off of one of them. And that's the one from which the payis would begin. Remember how they used to do it. They would pick a number, right? Then they would put a finger, everyone would put their finger out, they'd pick a number. They would take a turban off of one of them. He would be number 1, 2, 3, 4. They would go around, and whoever was, let's say the number was 93, whoever was 93, he would be the winner. Okay? But what do you see from that? That he had a mitznefet on his head. If you're going to tell me that they were wearing street clothes, mitznefet b'bigdei chol mi'ika, how can it say that they took off the mitznefet? How can it say that they took off the turban? The turban is one of the Bigdei Kehuna, so obviously when they were doing the lottery, they were with Bigdei Kehuna, right? So in fact, you could have a mitznefet even in Bigdei Chol, Kedetani Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda said, V'itema Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, some say it was Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, Kohen sh'asata lo imo ketonet, that if a Kohen's mother made for him a tunic to wear, Oved ba'avodat yachid, he's allowed to wear it for avodat yachid. If he has a personal korban that he wants to bring, a private korban. We saw this earlier in, I think in Masechet Shkalim. Yeah, right. So
except it was for a tunic, right?
Right. If she makes a tunic for him, he's allowed to wear it. So in other words, they could have their own personal Bigdei Kehuna, which weren't the real Bigdei Kehuna. They weren't acceptable for the communal service, but for private offerings, they could be. So it could be that it was wearing that mitznefet. So you can't prove from there that they were definitely wearing the official Bigdei Kehuna. Amar Abai says, Shemamina, you can learn something from this piece here that Lishkata Gazit, that this chamber of hewn stone, Chetzia b'Kodesh v'Chetzia b'Chol, half of it must have been laying. In other words, the layout of this chamber where they did the lottery, half of it was resting in what would be called Kodesh. In other words, half of it was in the space that would be called part of the Azara, part of the courtyard, and half of it is outside. Like if you were to see a bird's eye view and draw a line, let's say you were to draw the perimeter of where the Azara is, where the courtyard is, and you were to look down from the top, you would see that half of this chamber is within the perimeter and half of it is outside of the perimeter, basically. That's the way that they're saying it. Now, how so? How do we know this? And you can also tell that there must have been 2 entrances and exits to this chamber. One that opened to a non-holy area. Har Habayit is a lower level of Kedusha. And one that opens to the Azara, that opens to the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash itself. How do you know this? So he's going to say like this, because Because if you're going to say that the whole chamber was actually in the airspace of the Azara, within the perimeter of the Azara, so then Zaken Yoshev b'Marava, how could the rabbi who was supervising, right, the Chacham who was supervising, how could he sit in the west part of the chamber? Amar Mar, the master said, Ein Yeshiva ba'Azara, Ela l'malchei Bet David bilvad. The only people who are allowed to ever sit in the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash are the kings of the Davidic dynasty, Malchei Bet Yehuda, Bet David rather. So how could this rabbi be sitting in there? Obviously, it can't be part of the Azara. So maybe he'll say the whole place is chol then. The reason why he's allowed to sit is because it's chol. But you still have the fact that the lottery took place in the eastern part of the chamber. We said before that the reason why they do the lottery is to create commotion, to create excitement in the Bet Elohim, in the house of God. If this area is not considered the house of God, then it wouldn't count. So, you wouldn't have it. Obviously, the western part was outside of the Beit HaMikdash precinct. The eastern part was within it. So the lottery took place in the eastern part, and that was part of the courtyard. That was within the perimeter of the courtyard. The western part where the rabbi was sitting was outside of the perimeter of the courtyard.
Or not?
It's not a secret. And if you're going to tell me that it had only one door, if it's open only to the Azara, in other words, the only way in and out of this chamber is through the courtyard. So then you're going to tell me that this rabbi is sitting in the western part of the chamber. But we learned in the Mishnah, we learned that if a chamber is built, even if the floor of the chamber is outside of the courtyard, but the only door in and out of this chamber is through the courtyard, then what do we say about that? We say that that's considered to be tochan chol. If the only, tochan kodesh, that the inside is considered holy. So if you're going to tell me it's open to the chol, then how can you have the lottery in the east? We learned in the Mishnah, basically the logic is like this, that there are two ways we can determine the sanctity of an area. Number one is, where is it physically situated? Is it physically within the perimeter of the courtyard, or is it physically outside? So the Gemara's answer was that it's both. In other words, half of it is, the eastern part is actually, if you were to draw a line around the perimeter of the Beit HaMikdash, around the courtyard, it would be within it. But the western part was outside of it. Okay? Also, it must have two doors, because even a chamber that's totally chol, if it has only one door in and out, and that door is to the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash, the Azara, then the whole place is going to be Kodesh. It doesn't matter where it lies on the map. Okay? And if the only door in and out of it is Chol, then even if it lies on the map inside the Beit HaMikdash, it would be considered outside. Right. Because the only door in and out is to Chol. So therefore there must have been two doors. In order for it to have a dual status, that it could both be treated as Chol and as Kodesh, it has to have two things. It has to be that it's partly within the perimeter of the courtyard and partly outside. And it also has to be that it has a door to the Chol and a door to Kodesh. That's the way that the Gemara answers. So new Mishnah says, Hapayis Hasheni, the second lottery that they did each day, because we learned the first one was about Terumat HaDeshe. That was added because of concerns about racing. Kohanim doing marathon race up the ramp. So Hapayis Hasheni, Mi Shochet, Mi Zorek, Mi Medashin Mizbeach HaPnimi, Umi Medashin Etam Menorah, Umi Maleh Evarim. So this second lottery determined who's going to slaughter the Korban Tamid? Who's going to throw the blood? Who's going to be Midashin Mizbeach HaPnimi? Who's going to clean the ashes off the inner altar? The inner altar is the altar, not Trumat HaDeshen. That's the outer altar. The inner gold altar inside the Kodesh, which is a higher level of Kedusha. That's where the Ketoret was put. Who's going to do that? And who's going to clean? Umi Midashin Etam Menorah. Who's going to clean out the menorah? These activities. And Umi Maleh Ivarim Lakevish. And who's going to bring the limbs up the ramp towards the altar? Okay? That's not the same as maktir. It's not the same as putting them on the fire, but first they would be carried up the ramp. So then it says, Harosh ve'aregel, the head and the rear right leg of the animal, that was carried by one Kohen. Ushtei yadayim, the two forelegs of the animal were carried by another Kohen. Ha'oketz v'aregel, the tail and the rear left leg were carried by another Kohen. Ve'hazeh, the breast, v'hagera, and the neck and all that was attached to the neck, the organs that were attached to the neck, were carried by another kohen. And the two sides of the animal were carried by another one. And the inner organs were carried by another one. Okay, so by sixth kohen. And then you had Vasolet, the mincha offering, the flour offering that accompanied the korban tamid, was brought by another kohen. Vachavitin, and the chavitin is the offering of the kohen gadol each day. But even though the kohen gadol had to bring it himself, he had assistance from another kohen who would participate. Vayayin, and the nisuchayayin, the wine that was poured as a libation together with the korban tamid every day. Shlosha asar kohanim zachubo. All of these different activities encompassed 13 kohanim. So you needed 13 kohanim for the daily korban tamid, basically processes.
What was korban tamid?
A sheep. Kivasim ben Ishana Shnayim Lam Lam. Yeah, we just read it this morning, right? A sheep. Amar ben Azai. Lifnei Rabbi Akiva.
So it wasn't really a question of inability to physically do it.
No, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur did everything.
Almost take the entire thing, so it was just.
On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol did everything, but it was considered extremely exhausting. This is a way to.
Right.
V'rov am hadrat melech. First of all, you have more honor to the process when you have more people involved. You also give people the chance to do the mitzvah. Mm-hmm. It's also more easier. It's easier for them. It would be very taxing for one person to do everything. Amar ben Azai, Lifnei Rabbi Akiva. Ben Azai said in front of Rabbi Akiva, Mishum Rabbi Yoshua, and the name of Rabbi Yoshua, Derech Hilucho haya karev, as we're going to see in the Gemara exactly what this means. That this is the wrong order of Evarim. Because our Mishnah gives an order of the parts of the animal. How were they brought up the ramp? They were brought up head and rear right leg, then 2 forelegs, then tail and rear left leg, then breast and neck, then 2 sides, then inner organs. We're going to see that there's a difference of opinion about this.
From and to?
They slaughtered the korban tamid
on
the floor of the courtyard.
From the
In
courtyard.
the Azara.
And then they brought them onto.
And then they would they would slice it up,
Right.
And then they would bring it. They would apply the blood.
Right.
Slice it up, and bring the pieces up to the ramp.
Through the right.
Up the ramp. That ramp that you see that goes, the one that would run up.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so the Gemara says, Ibailu, they asked a question. It's not so clear from the Mishnah because it says the second lottery would determine 13 different activities. How did it work? Does that mean that they did a separate lottery for each of the 13? Like they said, okay, who's going to be the shochet today? Let's do a lottery. Okay, and they picked Kohen number 1. And they said, okay, let's do, who's going to do the Zorek? Who's going to be Zorek? Who's going to throw the blood? Okay, we do another lottery. Okay, now who's going to be doing cleaning the inner altar? Okay, we'll do another lottery. In other words, was it 13 lotteries?
Process.
But it's just at one gathering. So they call it Pa'is HaSheni because they gathered a second time. Or was it one lottery that determined everything? In other words, they would pick, let's say you're a Kohen. They picked you as the Shochet, the guy to your right is the Zorek, the guy to his right is the... In other words, they determined it by picking one guy, and you determine everyone else. To everyone to your right. Okay? That's the way that's the question. So it's like Rashi says, that kegon mishochet ulekeshizke mishezachal shchita shuv in pais shar yud bet avodot el kohanim shemukafin liyamino nimshachin acharav kefi seder mishnatenu. Okay, in other words, you would go to the right of the kohen that won, and number 2 would be this guy immediately to his right, then number 3, number 4, number 5, up to 13. So that's the question. Tashma, come and listen. Arba Paisot Hayusham, it says that there were 4 lotteries. Now, if you're going to tell me that for each of these 13 components of the process they had to make a separate lottery, so then Tuvahavu. It's not just 4 lotteries. You're talking about 13 lotteries in this Mishnah alone. How can you say it's 4? So therefore it must be what? It must mean that the second lottery was one lottery and everyone was determined by that one choice. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. No, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says that's not necessarily true. Haki kamar. This is what it means. Arba pa'amim nechnasin lafis ulchol chada v'chada hayu tuva paisot. That it means that 4 times they gathered together. But yes, in each gathering there could be tuva paisot. There could be many lotteries. So in this second gathering, there were actually 13 separate lotteries. But it was only one gathering. In other words, they gathered it first to do Trumat Hadeshin, to decide who's going to do Trumat Hadeshin. Then they gathered again and did 13 lotteries the second time. But it's one gathering, so it's called Pa'is Sheni. We turn to Kafei Amud Bet.
They call it pipes.
That's the gathering for the lottery, saying, okay, we're having a raffle now. That doesn't mean there's only one drawing in the raffle. Could say, okay, we're doing the raffle now. Okay, there's 10 raffles, but there's 10 different prizes, but it's one raffle. Right? Okay, so Tashma Kafei Amud Bet. Tashma, come and listen. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo haya payis l'machta, ela kohen shezacha b'ktoret, Omar lezeh she'imo, zechei imi b'machta. That there was no separate lottery for the machta. The machta is the person who would take fire from the outer altar and put it on the inner altar in order to burn the incense. So there was no separate lottery for bringing the fire to the inner altar. What did they do? The person who won the ketoret, whoever won the ketoret would pick his friend and say, okay, you are going to come do the machta with me. So what does that show you? That shows you that everything else had its own lottery. Because it says there was no lottery for the machta. There was no lottery for the one who's going to bring fire into the inner altar. But the implication is that for every other part of the process, there was a separate lottery. Right. The Gemara says, no, shane machta uktoret techada avodahi. That's different. The case of the ketoret and the machta is different because that's only one service. In other words, that was considered one thing. So therefore, because it's considered one thing, so if you take a look at what Rashi says here, he says when
this is considered pratuklan, right?
Well, it's two parts.
I mean, if it's refuted, but I mean, if it wasn't refuted, that would be.
So what you see, So what you see at first, you might say, so you see from this. I was thinking the second answer before I thought the first one. The first approach of the Gemara to try to use this proof is that you see that they didn't make a lottery for every separate avodah. It was predetermined. Whoever got the ketoret, the guy to his right or whatever, his friend, got the machta. Got to bring in the fire. So that shows you don't have to have a separate lottery for everything. So the Gemara says, no, you do have to have a separate lottery for everything. It's just that bringing the fire in for the ketoret and bringing in the ketoret is not considered two different things. It's considered one thing that's shared by two people. Okay, but in our case where there are 13 different things, maybe indeed there's a separate lottery for each one. You can't prove that there isn't a separate lottery for each one. Ika da Amri, some roll this proof out the opposite way. Davka machta uktoret echad avodahi. That what do you see from here? That specifically when it comes to bringing the fire in and bringing the ketoret, that it's really one process. Because why are you bringing the fire in order to burn the ketoret? Aval shar avodot ba'e payis. The implication is that any other avodah does require a lottery. In other words, from the fact that you see that here there's no lottery required, why is that? Because they're one process. Implication is everything else does require a separate lottery. So the Gemara says, no, machta itzrich. No, we could still say that really you don't have to have a separate lottery for every activity. However, here it's different because because you might have thought, even if we were to assume that for everything in the list of 13 there's only one lottery, still we could say that you might have thought that for bringing the fire in and the incense you would have two separate lotteries. Why? Because since it's a special, it's only twice a day that they did ketoret, and it made the kohen very rich. Right? There was a special bracha from the ketoret. So, therefore, people really wanted it. So you might think that you would have two lotteries to let more than one person be involved. But everything else could be that it's all determined by one lottery. It's all predetermined. We pick one guy, everyone else is by domino effect. So the Gemara says, Kamash Malan, therefore it has to tell you that no, even the ketoret and the fire is only one lottery. Because the guy who wins the ketoret says to his friend, you bring the fire. Okay, but now the Gemara says, Tashma, come and listen to Tani Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia said, Lo lechol avodah v'avodah mefaisin, ela kohen shezacha b'tamid, shenem asar echav kohanim nimshachin imo, shema mina. But Rabbi Chia finally has the definitive proof here. We find the definitive proof because Rabbi Chia taught in the Baraita that we don't make a payis for each and every one of the services. Rather, what do we say? We choose one kohen to be the shochet, and the 12 kohanim to his right, if we go around the circle, are predetermined by that. So in fact, there is not more than one lottery, there's only one lottery.
So what's Pais Hashini?
The Pais Hashini is the one lottery that picks Matyas as the shochet, and whoever's to the right is the zorek, and whoever's to the right of him is the whatever.
What's the first one?
The Trumat HaDeshen.
Okay.
We're only talking about the second one.
Yeah. In terms of the Pais Hashini, there's one. Okay.
Right. All 13 of these are chosen by one lottery.
By one lottery.
There's not 13 raffles for each thing. There's one raffle. Whoever wins, the guy to his right, the guy to his right, the guy to his right, they are determined by that one choice. So still concludes the Gemara, despite the arguments trying to prove that maybe we should have to have multiple lotteries. So the Gemara says, by the way, they asked a question, Mi mikabel. There's something missing from the Mishnah. Who is mikabel? Because it says the shochet, the person who slaughters the korban tamid, and it says the person who's throwing the blood on the altar, right? The zorek, but it doesn't mention the mikabel. What about the mikabel? The mikabel and molich, the guy who receives the blood in a vessel and walks it over to the altar. Who's going to do that? Shochet mikabel. If you're going to allow the person who does the slaughtering to receive the blood, di'i amrat zorek. So we could say the guy who slaughters. Why? Di'i amrat zorek mikabel agav havivutei lo mikabel le'lechul edam. Because you might be concerned that if the guy who's going to apply the blood, throw the blood on the altar, is going to receive it, he might not wait to receive all the blood because he really wants to do the mitzvah. It was a big thing. The completion of the korban is the throwing of the blood. It's the most critical thing. So he might be really overzealous and not wait for all the blood and run and do it. So maybe we want the shochet to do it because he knows that he's sitting there anyway. He's not going anywhere, right? Oh, dilma zorek mekabel. Maybe he'll let the guy who throws the blood receive it. Or maybe he'll say that the one who's going to throw the blood should be the one to receive it. Specifically, why? Because since shechitat korban can be done, the slaughtering of the korban can, in theory, be done by a non-kohen. So it could be that once in a while you'll have a non-kohen do it.
How does he receive it?
In a gold container.
So the shochet comes and
he slaughters and then he grabs a container to catch it.
Oh, directly from...
Yeah, directly from the animal. So maybe it's better to have the zorek do it. Why? Because the shochet, he could be a non-kohen. Whereas the person who receives the blood has to be a kohen. So we shouldn't make the shochet the receiver of the blood. So the Gemara now has to solve this, and it says, Tashima, come and listen. Ben Katin, who was a Kohen Gadol, Ben Katin, asa yud bet dad la kiyor. There was a kiyor. The kiyor is what they would wash their hands and feet from. Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, right? That was the faucet. He made 12 faucets in the faucet. Why? Kadeshu yud bet echava kohanim asukin batamid meqadeshin yedehem v'raglehem bevatachat. So all 12 of the kohanim who were doing the avodah could wash their hands at the same time and their feet at the same time. Now wait a second. Now if you're going to tell me that the shochet, the slaughterer, is included in the list of kohanim, and the slaughterer is also going to receive the blood, that would mean that there were 13. In other words, if you're going to say that the one who slaughters the korban is going to receive the blood, that means the one that slaughters the korban has to be a kohen, must be a kohen, and that means that there must be 13 kohanim. Whereas if you say that the one who throws the blood has to receive it, so that means there could be only 12 kohanim, because the first thing, the slaughtering, could be done by a non-kohen. So the fact that he's saying you only need 12 means that the first guy, the slaughterer, could be a non-kohen. And if the slaughterer could be a non-kohen, that means he can't be the one to receive the blood. So therefore the Gemara says, Alalav shemamina zorek mikabel. Therefore we see that the one who's going to throw the blood, who must obviously be a kohen, is going to be the one to receive it. Shemamina. Not the one who slaughters, because the one who slaughters is not included in the list, because he could be a non-kohen.
And therefore they're not concerned that he's going to...
overstep his bounds or something, and he's not going to rush. Well, the zorek, they still could be concerned that he's going to rush. But I guess that wasn't the defining concern. That wasn't enough of a concern. Amar le Rav Acha b'rei de Rava le Rav Ashi. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, Af ana nami tanena. You could see this even from another source, from another Mishnah in Masechet Tamid, because it says, Shachat shochet v'kibel mekabel. Ubalo lizrok. It says in Masechet Tamid, the shochet should slaughter, v'kibel hamekabel, and the receiver receives, uva lo lizrok, and comes to throw the blood. What does that show you? Shemamina. You see from there that the one who's going to throw the blood is the one receiving. Okay. Now the
it's the I mean, this is an aside, but is the receiving of the blood more important than the zrika?
No, the zrika is it's more important than the shechita, though, because the shechita could be done by non-kohen. No, the zrika is more important.
Here it says the most critical.
Is the zrika?
It says the most.
No, you're right. The zrika is always the essential part of the korban, for sure.
Yeah.
So now the Gemara says, Amar Ben Azai lefnei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Azai said that no, there's a different order to bringing up the Evarim, not the one that we mentioned in the Mishnah. So Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbi said, Ketzad derech hilucho. So he said you have to do it derech hilucho, the way that the animal walks. What does it mean, the way that the animal walks? Harosh ve'aregel, first the head and the rear right leg, because everybody agrees. They learn from a pasuk that the head and the rear right leg always go first. That's not negotiable. But what about the rest of it? The rest of it is derech hilucho. So then, what's going to be next? Hechazeh v'hagira, the breast fats and the neck, and the organs connected to the neck. Ushtei yadayim, and the two front forelegs. Ushtei defanot, and then the two sides. Ha'oketz v'haregel, and then the tail and the rear left leg. That's going according to the animal's actual walking. In other words, from the head of the animal to the back. Okay, except for the head and the rear right leg, which are always done that way together. Okay, but everything else is going derech hilucho. Rabbi Yossi omer derech hefsheto hayakarev. Rabbi Yossi says no. You don't bring the parts of the animal according to the way it walks from head to back, from front to back. You go from back to front. Derech hefsheto, the way that you skin the animal. So how does that work? Hayakarev ketzad derech hefsheto harosh ve'aregel. Again, always the head and the rear right leg go first. That's just a gezerat hakatuv. But then ha'oketz ve'aregel, first you do the tail and the rear left leg. Ushtei defanot, and then the sides. Ushtei yadayim, and then the two forelegs. Hechazeh, then the breast. V'agera, and then the neck. So you're going from back to front of the animal. Rabbi Akiva omer derech nitucho hayakarev. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's not the walking and it's not the skinning. It's the nituah, the cutting up of the animal that determines it. In other words, you would cut it up. Rashi says you would cut up each piece, and in the order that it was cut, you would give it to the kohen to carry it up the ramp. So it would go by the right. So what is that order? Right. What is that order then? So he says ketzad derech nitucho. What is the order of cutting it up? Harosh ve'aregel. Again, everyone agrees. The head and the rear right leg are first. Ushtei yadayim. The first thing you cut is the two forelegs. Hechazeh v'hagira. Then the breast and the neck. Ushtei defanot, and then the two sides. Ve'oketz ve'aregel, and then the tail and the left rear leg. So that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi HaGalili Omer. Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says derech iluyav hayakarev. Okay, it goes by iluyo. It goes by the superiority of the pieces. Okay, how so? Ketzad derech iluyo. What does this mean? Harosh ve'aregel. First you have the head and the rear right leg, because that's always that way. Hechazeh v'hagira. Then you have the breast and the neck. Ushtei defanot, the two sides. Ve'oketz ve'aregel. And then you have the oketz and the regel. You have the tail and the rear left leg. And then ushtei yadayim. And then you have the two forelegs. So he says the significance of it. In other words, the pieces that are the most desirable for a person who's eating the animal. So the breast and the neck with the organs attached to it is the best in terms of the fats. Then the two sides, then the back, then the leg. The front legs are nothing, right? So he says if you go by what's the most desirable meat or the fattiest meat, as we're going to see, then you'll end up with a different order. So now the Gemara asks that v'aktiv, it says in the pasuk in Yechezkel kol netach tov yarech v'chatef, that every good piece yarech v'chatef, the thigh and the shoulder. So Rashi says, Alma yerech malei mikatef. The implication is that the thigh, the leg, is greater than the katef. And I think what Rashi means is not like the Mefarshim interpret him, which makes it a problem, that he's comparing the rear leg to the front leg. But what he means is the katef, meaning the chest of the animal. In other words, the shoulder doesn't mean the front leg, but the chest of the animal. In other words, the pasuk seems to say that the legs are better than the chest. But that isn't true. You're telling me that the chest is better than the legs. Right? You're telling me that if I'm going by what's best, I would get the breast area first because it's got more fat to it. Not the legs. But the pasuk is saying yerech is better than katef. That the thigh is better than the front. That's talking about a skinny animal. In other words, a skinny animal, the legs are superior because they're stronger, looking for the muscle. Right? In a skinny animal, there's nothing in the fatty areas. There's nothing anyway. But in a fat animal, everybody wants the fatty parts. They're going to want the chest first. Amar Rava says, whether you go according to our Tanakama or Rabbi Yossi, they both are determining. They're both looking at the superiority of the meat.
But then
however,
make the order dependent on the fattiness of the
The fattiness of the animal. No, well, because you always use a fat animal for the korban tamid. That's the implication. Yeah. So he says more. But the thing is, more azil batar ivra de bisra, more azil batar shamna de bisra. The difference is that our Tanakama, if you read our Mishnah, you'll see that the order is following the size of the pieces. That's how he defines superiority, and Rabbi Yossi is following the fattiness of the pieces, and that's why he has a different order. Mai ta'amas al karegel bahade resha. So the question is, why is it that the regel goes with the head? In other words, why do we always put the rear right leg together with the head? Mishum dereisha nefishe be'atamot, because the head is very bony. There's not much fat in the head. Karva regel bahadeh. So we bring the regel, we bring also the leg together with it. I guess that means because it's also bony. Okay.
Well, the note here it says,
what does it say?
Because there's nothing to it, so you bring,
there's not much to it, so you bring something extra.
So bring something
to supplement, right? To supplement, because there's not much there, right? Dechulei alma mihat. However, everybody agrees rosh karev beresha, that we first bring the head. How do we know that? Minalan detanya, as it says in the Braita, minayin la rosh bapeder shekodin lechol ivarim. How do you know that we bring the head and the fat, a layer of fat that they would bring with the head before all other pieces? Talmud lomar, the pasuk says et rosho v'et pedro. It always says when it mentions the bringing up of the ivarim, its head and its peder, its head and its fatty layer. Ve'arach, and it says that you have to set those up. That's what you have to offer. Ve'idach peder achrina lemay ata. What about the second time when it mentions the offering of the olah? It mentions harosh etarosh ve'etapader. It mentions the second time the head and the fatty layer. Why does it have to say it twice? So the answer is the Kedatanya, as it says in the Braita, Ketzad hayoseh, that how would they do it? That when they would offer the head, what they would do was they would put the layer of fat over the neck of the head to cover the bloody area, because it looks gruesome, when you see the detached head of the animal. It doesn't look nice. It's more of a derech kavod to cover it with a layer of fat. So Rashi says it doesn't have to ask, why does it mention the head twice? It has to mention the head twice, because since it mentioned the head before, but then it talked about skinning the animal and offering it, and we know that at the time of the skinning, the head is already separated from the other limbs, so it has to include it again to make sure that you realize that also has to be brought up to the altar. Okay, but in the case of the peder, mentioning the layer of fat again, it's emphasized it goes with the head, meaning that it covers over the more gruesome part of the head that otherwise would be exposed when you brought it to the altar.